Hey, everybody, and welcome to another intersectional conversation here, talking about how to be a just Lutheran. And today I have with me someone who I have known, I think, for over 20 years, popping in and out of different parts of the justice parts of my life. Ross Murray I have known through the LGBTQ work that has happened in the Lutheran Church and different times when the Lutheran Church had a bit of a hiccup, not sure if LGBTQ individuals could serve on both sides of the communion table. And as Ross and others created the naming project and a camp for LGBTQ youth, and then also in other roles as I have kind of been out in the world and done professional things, as Ross then was working at GLAAD, a media organization that helps folk really get on the same page with LGBTQ activism and advocacy. And so I'm so excited that Ross is joining us today. Ross,
hello.
Will you fill in some of the additional intersections that I haven't lifted up? You wear so many different hats and sideways stoles that I think it would be great to
have. I have a lot of different things going on. I am intersections. I'm a white gay guy. That's how I call myself. Very Scandinavian, very Midwestern. I live in New York City now, but I retain my Midwestern sensibilities, I like to think. I'm very good at being passive aggressive. And then in my work, you kind of described some of this. So the Youth Naming Project is an LGBTQ youth ministry and a summer camp. And hopefully it's turning into more of an educational process for other leaders as well who are doing work with young people. And my day job, the thing that pays me and my call as a deacon is as the senior director of education and training at the GLAAD Media Institute. I've had a few different job titles at GLAAD, kind of shift and change over time. And there's sort of been some through lines of working with individuals, people, organizations. GLAAD is a media advocacy organization. So working with journalists and writers and photographers and occasionally like film people and television people, celebrity, pop culture, gaming, comic books, music. There's a lot. I talked to a class that I was like, I can name drop a lot of people that I've met because GLAAD Media Awards celebrities walk in front of me and I serve like an usher and say, thank you for coming. Now please go over there. So like I can say I've interacted with several celebrities, but mostly to direct them somewhere. And I live in New York. I mentioned that. And now just wrote a book called Made Known Loved, Developing LGBTQ-Inclusive Youth Ministry. And the cool thing is I kind of get to bring all of this stuff together and they overlap and they reinforce each other. So even though it seems like a lot of weird, disparate stuff. Oh, and one other thing, I'm excited about this. I'm producing a podcast that I did not think of myself as a podcast person, but it's been fun. It's called Yes, Jesus. The hosts are Daniel Francesi, the actor from Mean Girls and Looking, and Azariah Southworth, who used to host a show on TBN. And it's funny. It is funny, y'all, and faithful. And I get to be like researcher, script writer, tell them what to say and how we're going to say it. And they're just fun, reinforcing stuff to do. That was a lot of different intersections, but yeah, it's a lot going on.
I love it. You often are someone who is, I would say, like the person who's getting stuff done, but typically like the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, right? You're often, when I've known you, like with the stuff with Reconciling Works and Lutherans Concerned, you're always like researching policies and like scheduling and organizing. And so it's been so lovely to kind of see all the different ways that you've been able to like make justice happen and kind of root for justice to happen, but not need to be the person who's like out front and in the limelight. And so, so just know that I think it's really wonderful what you've been up to all this time, even if like when historians go back and look, they don't always notice the people who are in those spaces who really get the work done. The folk who are kind of in the midst of watching how change happens get it, that it's those folk that really are kind of grinding the stone to like get the church to move forward. And so I've always been grateful that you put in the
Thank
hard
you.
work. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I'm horribly pragmatic and like, okay, how I operationalize stuff really quickly. So people sort of like, they describe, that they're, oh, we're going to do this. This is the new strategic, this is the new thing we're going to do. And like, I don't even know how I emotionally feel about it, but in my head, I'm still like, okay, how's that going to work? What does that actually mean that I have to do? And other than, I think other people think of this in a different way. People kind of like, oh, we get the concept, we get behind it, we understand it, and then we start doing it. And I feel like for me, I have to like practice it. And then I can develop like, oh, now I understand it and I can describe it and I can like live into it and talk about it. So it's been one of those things that I think is really interesting of like, I always go to like, how do we do it? And then later I can tell you like what we're doing, but I can only tell you what we're doing after I've started doing it.
Well, that's kind of like what I imagine a true definition of what a deacon is. But would you be willing to talk about, like, especially for those who maybe haven't seen a deacon? We've talked to a bunch of people from the deaconess community, which is slightly different, right? But slightly the same. How do you describe that role that you take on as a deacon?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with deacons, and I don't know if everyone who's listening are all Lutherans, deacons mean something different in every denomination. So like when I say it, I do not trust that people know this, like assume the same thing that I mean when I'm saying it. It's deacon is the queer of the church world. I think it's the like no universally agreed upon definition. But for the ELCA, the best way to describe, I think, the work of deacons is that our work is at that place where the church meets the world. That's what I heard and kind of how I repeat it. And so, my focus is not, I don't have a congregational call. I don't have a congregational ministry. I'm a member of a congregation and I try to be a good active member, but that's not where my work is. My work is external facing and is doing, it's word and service. And so it's not just, I interpret word as more than just preaching. But what are those things that are done and said out in public, the work, the teaching, the training that I do, and even some of that kind of doing that you described. And that is in service. And my particular call is to my job at GLAAD. And so that service is advocacy work, LGBTQ advocacy work. And what I think is, this is what I like about deacons is none of our calls are the same, and they're all kind of weird and kind of entrepreneurial and kind of, again, slippery definitions. And quite honestly, I had my job at GLAAD for 5 years before it became a call. And that was just my process of candidacy and all this stuff, like jumping through all the hoops and being super slow about it. And so then finally, it was really funny because GLAAD's a secular organization and they were supportive. Like they love that I did religion work. They love that they had someone that could lead and do that. And when it got time to, can this be a synodically authorized call? So the synod said, can you get a letter from the organization? And the letter, can say you're employed. It can say what your salary is. It can say that you have health insurance and retirement, kind of those like synod guideline type things. And it's not a letter of call, but it kind of is. That's as close to a letter of call as GLAAD's going to give. And of course, this organization does not know this world at all. And I say this, and our operations person says, I think we're going to give this to the lawyers to handle. And I just thought I feel like those are the people who are going to least understand this. And what I got back was a letter that said, Ross Murray is employed here. This is his salary. He has health insurance and retirement. And while we support him, we do not endorse any specific religion. Signed, GLAAD. And that was enough, because also it doesn't matter. The call comes from the church. The work and the employment comes from GLAAD. I'm sort of the one that brings it together. If I stop, if I get fired from GLAAD, I'll lose my call. That's the church thing. But also GLAAD doesn't lose anything by not having me be a deacon. And my work largely is the same as what it was before. So I always find that interesting and sort of how you build that. But that's kind of what deacons do. We do a lot of just make up our own jobs.
But how beautiful. I bet most people wouldn't know that the Lutheran Church had authorized a call to like do this work of helping society move forward on LGBTQ issues, and particularly for people who, you know, work and serve in synods where that kind of public ministry call is not something that would be authorized by their synod. I think that's a great, like, it's just a great pathway for other people to know the full diversity of ways that people can like live their faith into the world. And how do you balance, you work in a secular organization that has lawyers who write about religion, right?
Or don't, like very explicitly do not.
You also kind of, at least once a year during the GLAAD Media Awards, hang out with very fancy people that often are thought to be of diverse religions, but sometimes seem at odds. And also you like are working in your own church. And I do see you, like, for example, if someone wanted to pause a famous worship service I've been at, they might find you in the crowd, perhaps, right? But
show up. Yep.
How do you balance your own faith with all of these different kind of spheres that you're working in?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to being a doer. I feel like the faith, that my faith that I tends to come out in practice and in action more than anything else. So it kind of in the same way that like learning how to accept even just a new task or a job or a strategy or something is a little bit like it's going to happen in the practicing of doing it. And I think what's interesting is that, you know, if I had a churchier job, people have this assumption, and you've probably heard this a lot too, like, you know, oh, you're a pastor, you must just sit around and pray all day, right? And you're like, oh, but you have to manage a budget and you have to do a bunch of stuff that they don't actually teach people in seminary. And you know, my friends are like, my eyes glaze over at budgets, but I'm the one that has to approve these and run them. And so in a way, I'm bringing that into an environment that, you know, it's not presumed that way. And so I put the layer of faith on top of whatever I'm doing. And, you know, I don't lead with it often. I have sometimes been leading, you know, a training that we've hosted at GLAAD for like activists and whatever. And if our president's around during a break, I'll make her come in and say hi, because it's cool to see the president, right? And so like, and she'll come in and say hi for like 5 minutes. And then like out of nowhere, like, did Ross tell you he's a deacon? Which I hadn't, because she's excited about it. And she'll like say it to the crowd and she's like, oop, I outed you. Okay, go back to your thing. And then she'll walk away and go back to her office, and I'll keep going from there. So like, one, they like it. Two, it's interesting. Even though my title isn't religion anymore at GLAAD, it's still very applicable, and it still keeps coming up in so many different ways and places in terms of advocacy. And, you know, we need more religious voices that are speaking and invoking religion as a theme. GLAAD just did a HIV and faith summit, which I led a workshop, a training, but it was organized from the program officer for communities of color. And it was designed specifically for a lot of the organizations that he'd been working with across the South. And he'd put together 3 days of great panels that explored, here's faith, here's being a person of color in the South, here's how you get into the media, right? And they just kind of brought me in as the expert, as opposed to like, I didn't have to create the conference. It was just a like, oh, Ross, talk about how you talk about faith in a public setting, and it's the same skills that I was using when I worked at Reconciling Works, which I think is interesting. I still love doing the activity of asking people to name the most meaningful Bible passages for them and getting to read those back and record them. If I were in a room, we'd be writing it on a chalkboard or a whiteboard or something until it's full. On a thing like this, I'd ask them to put it in the chat and just like keep reading the chat as it kept going. And my boss said, like, you feel like you're preaching now that you're doing this. It's like, well, you're kind of getting fed all this really good stuff that then you let them know those are all pro LGBTQ verses because they mean something to you. And if they mean something to you, then they are. So go and claim it. Even with the entertainment, like, again, I pull in entertainment stuff and say like, oh, this has a theme, or this does this, or the show that you were on as well, which we can say it, right? Queer Eye. was, kind of an it was it's weird. I have weird connections with that because when the show began, they wanted to quit GLAAD training, and we did it over the phone. None of them knew who I was, and then later I would meet them and be like, "Do you remember being on a phone call with somebody from GLAAD? That was me." Like, "Oh yeah, I remember that." And actually, I think got to say that to Karamo at an opportunity after they had filmed. But I was sort of like, "You actually did a friend of mine," and sort of described that to him a little bit too, and excited to see what he's doing. And it keeps coming back. The religion stuff keeps coming up. So I'm glad I'm there, and I'm glad it's a part, and I can make it a part of what I do.
Yeah, and I guess I have to ask you, because you said it's important to ask, what's your favorite Bible story?
Story? So in terms of a passage, the one I really, really love is Romans 8. And one, because it is so good for dramatic readings. Just reading that passage out loud, just because it's such a list that builds of like, what can separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus? Can height or depth or angels or rulers or anything? And that just like builds. And then he goes, I believe that nothing. And that whole nothing is another thing. And then and it has this like, and I think the first time I ever read it publicly was at a Compline service. And I was reading it while a choir was singing, which just, that passage has drama in it. And so I love it. The other story that I'm kind of taken with lately is the story of Esther. And Esther is a really great coming out story that looks at, is it safe for me to share my identity? But if I don't, bad things are going to happen to everybody else around me. And I sort of hold up Esther next to like a Harvey Milk quote, like, you got to come out. You have to do it for the kids and your friends and your family and neighbors and all those things too. Like, I sort of like feel that going through her while she is trying to make a strategic decision of, one, whether to come out, and two, how to do it in a way that's going to have the right impact, right? Like, can I get the king happy enough with me that he does not instantly just kill me along with everybody else, but can I make him know and like and appreciate me, that like, oh my goodness, now that I know you, I'd never want to bring harm onto you. Well, this is what's happening, right? Oh, we should fix that. That's a little bit what I feel like is happening today. But I've been having a lot of fun. The Yes Jesus podcast, I will say, the Bible studies, the Bible stories that we do in there end up being really, really fun. It's them reacting. I will confess, they're branded big Bible stories. They're high while they record it. I'm usually not when I'm writing the notes, or no, I'm not at all when I'm writing the notes, I will say, because that's not part of my life. But and getting to hear two folks that have been grown up rather Pentecostal fundamentalist, and then like reread stories and sort of be like, no one ever said this to me before. That's kind of the script that I'm setting up for them, right? Like, let's just put the stuff together and put it down, and then have you explore and wonder and kind of and get to have that reaction, which is a fun reaction. And I feel other people have it, but Daniel Francesi is good at like leading people in like, oh my goodness, I didn't know this existed. It did. No one ever talked about it. What's yours?
I've really been enjoying The Man with the Withered Up Hand for very nerdy reasons, because I really like the ancient Greek of it all. And I like the kind of juxtaposition of the fig tree getting withered and God making a human unwithered.
Oh, right?
Yeah. So this idea that God can put water back into something that is dried up. And so I love this idea that, especially for folk we maybe have given up on. I've been trying to find language because in my personal story, all the people who have been kind of unkind to me at some point in my life, nearly 100% of them have said sorry at some point, not publicly, but they've said it. And so, so I'm trying to like capture what do we call that when the opposite of freezing someone in time at their worst moment, but to like that God puts living water back into people and then proclaims that they are different than when they were kind of all dried up and not able to be loving and kind. And so there's something in that story that's been really drawing me about thinking about how we can, be gracious when people took too long to come to the place where they are, but somehow still trying to figure out how to like weave them into our community. And there are times I think where there have been like long periods of like, I think about the way our Lutheran church behaved in the midst of the AIDS crisis. Like all of these people were dying, and then to make that the moment they were going to study whether or not people who are dying are fully loved by God. That for me is a dried up time, right? Like a time that I've been trying to figure out how we could have some way of like providing healing or recognizing that pairing the time and the words together made it essentially just beyond sin because of the epidemic and the timing. And then what do the words need to be now to like bring life back to that? I feel it really palpably here in San Francisco, and it may be the same there in New York, that there's just a couple generations of people that because of how churches spoke about LGBTQ people during that epidemic, that they're just never going to give most faithful people a time of day because it was so reprehensible. And so just thinking about like, where is the living water if there is any? And maybe it's just one of those things that's broken, but there's something in my little pastor heart that's just like, no, like, I feel like we need some refreshing with this. And so that's one of the things I've been thinking about. Would you be willing to tell people about your work at back when it was Lutherans Concerned? And because you did a lot of that kind of work with helping Lutherans see the hopefulness in the midst of those kind of weary times. And I would say half of the people who watch this lived through it with you, like Marianne Nelson says hi, from Lutherans Concerned. And then the other half of people are newer to the Lutheran Church, and they've only known Lutheranism post-policy change, where LGBTQ folk are now being supported.
Like the before times and the after times.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. We have like a demarcation period where like, I said this to someone else. It's so weird. Like in the Lutheran Church, you say 2009 and like everyone knows exactly what you're talking about. And I was like, I've said this to Lutherans, you realize that year doesn't mean anything to anybody else. Like, oh, that was the recession, right? No, it wasn't. That was like the policy change. Like that's like, I don't know. It's one of those like, like dates get seared. It's like 9/11. And it's just weird that like for Lutherans, we have like, I can say 2009 and everyone just kind of like knows exactly what all that means. Until they don't. And then when you're in outside circles, you have to explain stuff like 12 years ago. And before 12 years ago, here's what was going on. So I got involved with the organization Lutherans Concerned. Help me with this too. I have a really hard time. How do I talk about where I used to work when the place I used to work is the dead name of the organization now? So like I do things like the organization formerly known as Lutherans Concerned or Reconciling Works. But when I worked there, Lutherans Concerned, which is why I keep calling it that, despite the fact that you will never find that anywhere. So Reconciling Works was Lutherans Concerned. It was called that when I was there. I actually worked on the name change and then I left before they implemented it. So I was like, I knew that Reconciling Works was coming, but I've never been in the Reconciling Works. I sort of got looped in a little bit through a local chapter. I will confess, I've had a really privileged experience and not had a ton of discrimination. And the moment that I did, the one kind of instance that I did, people in the Twin Cities heard about it, and I sort of got involved with the Twin Cities chapter based on that. They heard what happened to me, and they're like, well, we're doing this work trying to make more welcoming congregations, even before the ELCA kind of study began. And so do you want to be a part of our local chapter? So sure, it's good and helpful and healing for me. And then they have an assembly that comes every couple of years. And I was like, it'd be good. We should go to one of the assemblies in Baltimore. And then the next assembly was going to become in the Twin Cities. And I was underemployed. And so I got hired to sort of be the conference planner, event person, and pulled together training, workshop. I mean, the stuff that would come with a regular conference, but also like, how do we make this be a moment? And it was also a moment because that was the beginning. It really was it was the early part of the ELCA sexuality study. And so this conference was going to be, we need a really bold organizing response to do that. And this is going to be the way or the place in which we can do that. And so I think there was a lot of pressure on making that worthwhile. And it was the largest attended one I think they'd ever had by like double. And people had to leave feeling like they knew what to do to impact their local congregation, which for many cases was, become a Reconciling in Christ congregation or expand that welcome, and what that meant for their synods, to make their synods become more welcoming and to have leadership that understood why welcome inclusion is important, and then ladder that up to the ELCA. And so that 2004 assembly sort of did that. And that kind of propelled me from there into planning conferences for them, being on the board, working on youth ministry, because that's part of what I do. And then I got hired because the executive director was sick. And so to help kind of keep together this team at the end of that study process, when it was kind of the last 6 months. And again, I'd been involved in the way, so I knew what was going on, but then like, oh, now you have to manage a staff and you have to like run this space. And this is the ultimate moment. And you're kind of playing substitute teacher. And so that's what I did. I kind of played substitute teacher. The nice thing is, because we'd done that work since 2004 to 2009, there was a really good infrastructure that was built up that was going to run and operate itself. And it didn't rely on a single person to like linchpin it all together. If this was more personality driven or charisma, personality kind of thing, I think it could have easily have fallen apart there, but we'd equipped and empowered so many people in so many different roles that they knew what to do as voting members, as volunteers, as an early morning choir. I just remember we planned space in the conference room and then said like, if you want to come and volunteer, here's what you can do. If you're a voting member, that's kind of your one job, be a voting member, like don't do other stuff. But if you want to volunteer, and then we came up with a gigantic menu of like all these things. And it was like choirs, hospitality, worship assistants. It was all this stuff, like, and sign up and then sorting people and slotting them into these things. Lots of logistics. But, and then after that it was a shift. It was like, how do we help the church and all of us live into this new reality? And everyone was scared. And didn't know what that was going to be. And I think the church leadership was, I think the anti-LGBTQ people were, and the LGBTQ people were too. And I think we all just kind of said like, well, now we have to figure out what this is, and was a part of that. And it's interesting. I always say like the after sort of like, once you got over that trepidation, there was a lot more freedom. And I feel like the church and the denomination has gotten themselves free from so much other stuff. They're like, well, we can't say this because someone else might be hurt or offended. And I feel like we've moved away from that a lot, which has been good. I think like clearly calls like mine would not have existed before, but calls like mine couldn't have existed in 2011 or 2012 when I first was starting at GLAAD either. I think the church had to get to a place of like, we're going to be okay. And then to sort of be able to look past themselves and the immediate crisis that they were sort of in to sort of see what was happening to the rest of the world. And that was going on with me too. I went from like focusing on denomination to then taking a job that's very external focused. And I joke, I was like, no one else in the world cares what Lutherans think. Like that was a great accomplishment for us, but no one knows. I had a very blunt boss that said that once, like, no one cares. As I was like talking about like internal church polity stuff, it's like, no one cares. And I had to learn that was true.
Yeah, it's amazing both how much work it took to kind of create that change. Because I think sometimes folk who weren't in the midst of it don't know that it took like so much people power doing this internal change work, everything from how do you tell your story when you eat lunch next to somebody from a particular synod who's the most likely to vote against your rights. And so it just was really impressive from like a logistics standpoint, like getting hotels for people from all over the country, to like how is the messaging and the storytelling going to go, to how do you celebrate tiny changes even if you're still heartbroken, right? And to just know that it took like just tens of thousands, if not more, people to be able to work towards that change.
It was the other really interesting aspect, I will say. So people don't remember 2009. But so we're in the Minneapolis Convention Center, and so most things are happening in the big, gigantic halls. But then like we had this space in the other end that was a couple, small ballrooms, and we called it Good Soil Central. It's like the volunteer meet space, all of our programming, and that was like our space. And working really hard to make that hospitable. So someone loaned us like living room furniture. We moved things around. There's the table space. There's a little prayer corner that was surrounded by the Shower of Stoles project. And one of my friends, who's a pastor, was an associate pastor, and her senior pastor wanted to he was kind of in the middle of the road. I don't know. I'd want to like be fair, and and went into can't remember what they're called now. The rock people, whatever they were called.
Solid
the
rock?
other, is that right? My God, I've already forgotten their names. They've obscured themselves.
Core. They were for a while.
The core group. Let's call them
the mugs. I remember the mugs that Reconciling Work used to make, because Anita Hill would come up with these really great Bible verses that were the opposite. They would make a name, and then Anita Hill would just like find a good Bible verse that made them hate their name the next year. So they were like solid rock for a while. And then Anita Hill made mugs that we were good soil and they were rocks. Right. And then I remember that they were Lutheran core for a while, because I think Bennett made mugs of like a rotten apple core.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But this pastor was sort of like, went to their space, went to ours, and like, well, this one's way more comfortable and fun and inviting. Like, I want to hang out here. Like I think he was inclined toward the core group, but they didn't have fun, friendly people. And we had like stuff happening all day long. And it seemed like we were like just a little like hive of activity. It was weird, sort of like running that. And I remember this also happens too. A couple people from core came over, they came in our space, and they were like, hi, we're from core. And I just went, okay. And like, what do you want? And there was someone who was in our space, and he kind of said some violent things, and then he took some of our materials and sort of ran out. And we wanted to make sure he was not going to be coming here to cause harm or damage here. I was like, well, and again, I go like very practical. I was like, well, okay, I feel like we should deal with that situation. And we sort of just jumped into like, we are clearly like opposite ideological ends, but now how do we deal with someone who's clearly has some mental illness? What do we do with security? There's a whole like kind of thing. I was like, and again, I sort of go to practical of like, well, okay, I don't want someone harming us here. What are we going to do? And then figuring that out and going from there. So even the core people were welcomed in the good soil. The core can be planted in the good soil and regenerate new life.
Well, where I was when the policy changed in 2009 is I was down on the assembly floor, and Irma Wolf, who was the president of whatever that group was called, came over and asked if she could pray with me right before the vote. And it was one of those prayers where like she was going to do all the talking and I was going to hold her hand. And so I was a little nervous, right? But then she said, Pastor Megan, if all the pastors in this Lutheran church were doing the kind of work with the poor that you're doing, we'd be headed in the right direction. Now let's pray for this like vote. And I was like, what is happening? Like, I felt like I was in like this strange place where we were we were praying for the exact opposite result, but trying to like be nice to each other, because Lutherans had always agreed on justice, even if they couldn't agree on any of these other social issues. And then I told that story to someone at the ELCA, and they hired Irma Wilf and myself to be blog writers after the policy changed about like what the Lutheran church was like. And they named that blog Living Lutheran, which is now the name of the whole magazine, like out of this idea that like if Irma Wolf and Pastor Megan can pray, maybe like our church is going to be okay. And so like, it was always an interesting thing how many like late night strategy meetings and policy drafts had to happen. And like at the end of the day, there was kind of this spirit of I think joy. I think I met a couple people in that room who were like, I was with the other group, but you're having parties. And there were people always like knitting scarves and giving them away. It felt like if you went to the Reconciling Works room, you'd like get a free grandma and she'd love you for the rest of your life. That's kind of what it felt like.
We also that year gave away, the year before we'd done the scarf stole things. And then that year in 2000, so that was 2007. And in 2009, we were like, did prayer shawls. And so prayer shawls became double handy because the convention center room was incredibly cold. So then everybody wanted our prayer shawls because they were so cold in this convention center. And they were coming up asking and like, oh yeah, we got this green one, and just random stuff. So like, oh yeah, our visual worked because we met a bodily need as well as the spiritual need.
Well, but so we've talked about parts of the joyful side. There's also the kind of yuckier side, which is that there really was a lot of stereotypes and hatred that was happening. And I think you were trained in youth and family ministry and had the chutzpah kind of during all of this with some of your other colleagues to create the naming project, like at the peak of when stereotypes about gay men being with young adults or not being, there were, I think, still a lot of states where it was against the law or it was completely legal to fire gay people from being teachers. And yet you kind of like took on this role of saying, we're going to have a youth camp, which just, I can only imagine the number of hateful things that people might have thought or mailed or said about that process. And so I wonder if you could let people know both about Naming Project, but also how you made it through that.
Sure. I mean, so the Naming Project came about. I mean, my undergraduate degree is in youth and family ministry. And so, and faith formation and identity development have always been a really like big thing for me. And when I started getting involved with Lutherans Concerned / Reconciling Works, I asked about youth ministry and they said, oh, they actually had a policy when I started. They did not allow anyone under 18. And that was out of fear. And I was like, well, I sort of said, you just need like good policies and background checks and you can do that. Like, don't abuse young people. That is bad no matter what setting it is. And so when we did the Naming Project, it was kind of under, that assumption of like, okay, we're probably going to get some scrutiny. So we're going to do the scrutiny ourselves. And what's funny is that like, and I do put this in my book, but I say things like, these are things that every youth ministry should be doing. Like the fact that like, oh, we have to think, well, you think about this because you're gay. I was like, well, everyone should do the background checks, and we do the background checks and we do the interviews and we do even if you're my friend, you're going to do an application. I'm going to have a file on you so that I know who you are to mitigate damage or concern or what everyone says. And so that we thought about kind of all that stuff sort of up front of like, we want to make sure that we're above reproach. Lutherans are, we didn't get a lot of direct hateful messages. What Lutherans are good at is the passive aggressive thing. Again, I'm Midwestern, so I recognize it. And the two that showed up, one I sort of laughed at. One of the co-founders is Jay Wiesner, and again, I was not clergy, so I was also not on most people's radar. Jay was getting ordained at that same time too, and there was an anonymous newsletter called the Lutheran Commentator that for the book I had to go find a copy so I could name what like issue and edition this was. And they said that Jay runs a ministry, they put ministry in quotes, that hooks up older gay men with sexually confused youth. And I read that and said, well, we haven't even started the mentoring program yet. And so we had that. And then the other one we had that I actually find weirder and creepier. So the Naming Project is a summer camp. It is on an island in Bay Lake in central Minnesota. And the island is also called Bay Lake Camp. And it's owned by First Lutheran Church in St. Paul. They've been a great partner. Use Bay Lake if you ever can. And so this island on a lake where it's a bunch of cabins, wealthy, nice cabins, some couple high-end resorts are there. And the camp director, Brenda, called me and said, Ross, something kind of weird happened. Someone went around the lake and put a flyer advertising, I should back up here. There was a documentary film made about our first year of camp called Camp Out. They made a flyer advertising the DVD for Camp Out. And it looks like an advertisement, but then it says like, great for Christmas, confirmation gifts, learn about this extraordinary camp and these extraordinary teenagers happening right here on Bay. Like, it never said anything bad about us. But they also, we were not selling this film, this DVDs. You could buy it off like Amazon or whatever. And, they listed this flyer that you should contact us directly. And they listed the price as $5 less than what it costs on Amazon. So this is the like passive aggressiveness of like, hey, get this. And we got 3 orders. And we had this whole conversation with an advisory committee of like, okay, what are we going to do? And they're like, it's only 3, spend the money. Like, we go to Amazon, order 3 DVDs, get it, write a letter to them that says, hi, I know you ordered this because you got this flyer. I don't know where this flyer came from. It's not from us, but you know what? We wanted to honor it and send this to you. One of the recipients wrote back to us and asked for her money back because this film is not what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a good gift for my grandchildren. It was not the same thing. And I had to write another letter back to her like, you know what? Once again, here's your money back. This was not from us. I never said this is going to be the best gift to give to your grandchildren. You should be less gullible, but you know what? There you go. Like, it was weird and creepy. But I mean, if that's as bad as it gets, I can definitely laugh at this now, 15 years later. But that was an odd experience, just having to sort of like look at this flyer, and someone decided to advertise us, I think, while trying to like foment anger that we existed, or that Bay Lake was letting us exist on their island, on their camp.
Well, I'm kind of grateful that if that's the worst of it. My hunch is that you're a kind person, and you're also hopefully the gift of years is that you don't have to remember the nonsense. You can just remember the joys if you like try to live your life.
These are my best stories, so I can't forget that because.
Right? Yeah. No. And the beautiful thing that I think also has come out of it is you have a new book that's coming out soon, April 20th, right?
Yes. This is a church publisher that thought that 420 would be the best day to put out a book about youth ministry. Yeah. I love you, Fortress Press, if you're watching, but you need to get some Urban Dictionary and some, I don't know what calendar it would be you look up, but you chose 420 for my youth ministry book. Okay. But
I think it's a great like full circle moment. The book, by the way, is Made Known, Loved, Developing LGBTQ-Inclusive Youth Ministry. And I mean, think of how many meeting sessions you might have had talking about Fortress Press not being willing to publish queer authors. And now here you are, one of those people whose book is out there. And not only is it like, I think back in the day when Reconciling Works was doing its thing, there was like one book that had been written by a lesbian, and it was called The L Word, but the L stood for Lutheran.
Mm-hmm. Which reclaiming the L word.
Yeah, there was no queer content in it at all. And so I'm just delighted, not only that you know our Lutheran publishers are moving in a different direction, but also that like all of the wisdom that you've kind of gathered over the years is something that is going to be in a book form really soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know what else I'm really excited for? I'll be honest. Besides Reclaiming the L Word, I feel like all the other books that have come out have either been like the debate or the apologetics. And and I was at a writers' conference too, and like a lot of like, we are so over apologetics. Like this book, it is a how-to book. It's sort of like, And I was like, if you're still trying to decide whether LGBTQ people are loved by God, this is really not the right book for you, because I'm already assuming that you're there and you're just trying to figure out how to operationalize it. Go read Matthew Vines if that's what you need, is like the biblical argument. I don't need to recreate his or there's a ton of people's stuff out there, right? And I think, and I realize publishers have actually realized that too. Like, one, there are fewer and fewer people interested in the debate. I think what people are really interested in now, even if they're still on different sides, what they're interested in is, what are the implications? What's the impact that's going to happen? And so even as we're the political fights that exist in the world, the legislatures across the country that are happening right now, the focus is really on impact, probably more than like questioning, is this real? I think everyone at this point is kind of like, is it real? And then we're all trying to do, well, what do we do about it? And I think we should do something. Let's do inclusive youth ministry. And other folks would figure out how, want to not be that. But I think that's what's been really good. And I like my book sort of, and I think Fortress and Augsburg Fortress, and now 1517 as it's called, has been moving this direction nicely for a while. And it's also nice to not be the first, right? So like, you've got like Emmy Kegler and Lenny Duncan and Guthrie Graves Fitzsimmons. And it's been odd, like people that I didn't realize like are published by this same publishing house. The fact they put out Broadleaf, that's been more focused on kind of like really good diverse storytelling. And so I'm reading Just Faith right now by Guthrie Graves Fitzsimmons, and soon going to read Julie Rogers, used to be a leader in the ex-gay conversion therapy movement and moved away, and she's working with Broadleaf as well. And I didn't know that when I had a meeting with her. I was like, "Who's your book with?" And I was like, "She's like, it's the same publisher as you." And I was like, "Oh, okay, the same." Okay. So yeah, I think that's good, and showing again that like fearfulness of like, well, we have to like couch things carefully. We're kind of over that now, and it means the Lutheran Church and the institutions that are kind of a part of that have said like, okay, now we've gotten that. Now the question is like, how do we do it? And I get there's still hiccups and problems with how we do it. That's fine. That's why I wrote books like this, and why I think Emmy's and Lenny's and Guthrie's and Julie's books are all going to be helpful for that too, because now it's doing a lot more of the living into the how.
Yeah, and I think I saw on Twitter yesterday that you were posting little sneak peeks of chapters too, about like, if you're interested in this, it's chapter 14, right?
I am, yeah. That is, I will again. I do not know how to do self-promotion. So, and someone's like, you have to constantly be on Twitter. I was like, okay, what am I going to? How do I talk about this book just over and over and over again? Oh, I know. Every chapter title is a question, and a lot of them are based on questions that we have received at the Naming Project. Like, how do I do this? What am I supposed to handle this? And then start to push them into kind of bigger, broader questions. It was like, oh, well then, you know what? We'll put the chapter question up top, and we'll give a couple ideas underneath it. And so you've been seeing those, like, here's what the chapter heading looks like. And my husband's been really great at doing stuff like that and kind of giving me graphics. And then I do kind of the writing of like, what's this going to look like? And yeah, I got to figure out the other like giveaways, like, sign up at madeKnownLove.org and you get I'm trying to make worksheets. Like, oh, what are the questions that you can ask? Sign up at rossmarie.org. They both point to the same place right now. What are the questions you should be asking? And then maybe you can print these. So I'm working on like the freebie giveaway things too. And it's my next project.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I follow you on Twitter, so everybody will have to compete with me. I'll win your fun swag.
Yes, I need to get if you get those mugs, I need to get like the old like Made Known Love mugs. I think that's good.
Yeah, I bet I have some things I could digitize from back in the day. Back when it was Lutherans Concerned, some good like you with a lot of file folders or something, like pencil or something.
Probably clipboard.
Yeah.
I was big on clipboards.
Clipboards, that's true. Yeah, I feel like clipboards. Yeah, I think there might be. I've donated most of my stuff, I think, to the GLBT Historical Society around here, just because, like, I want to honor it, but not necessarily dust it, if that makes any sense. And so, if anyone wants to see any of my old, knitted scarves and prayer shawls and name tags where I had to write in the word Reverend because the Lutheran Church wouldn't do it. You can check us out in the archives.
I'm bad. I don't save stuff like that. I'm a purger. I'm sort of like, oh, okay, this is, and I know there's archivists out there that are like, but sorry, that's me.
Well, you probably have a cleaner house. That's not the worst thing that could happen.
One would think, but we'll see. My husband's the opposite. He's a keeper, in terms of like, oh, that could be useful. And it's like, nope, I want to but every so often he'll get to the same point that I am like, okay, it's time to let stuff go. Here's my COVID confession. We basically have COVID clothes that we wear outside. So which means outside we wear the same clothes. And I've also decided this year, no one can see me below the nipples. And so why, I'm just going to wear the crappiest underwear I own and constantly, and then they're going to wear out into nothing. And then I'm just going to throw them away. But I have pants that are also wearing out and he's like, no, these are okay. I was like, there's a giant rip that is clearly across the ass by this point. These, so you go, he's like, no, you cut them and they become Daisy Dukes. Because or I put them in the clothes recycling and they go away and become new clothes and they're not in our home anymore because I have plenty of other stuff. So I've been big on wear things out, especially this year. Yeah,
I think maybe, do you think that's a piece of your Midwesterner kind of popping back up and being like, hey, your people just survived the Depression?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I told coworkers, I went full on Depression era granny for a while, reusing tea bags. And I can get 2 or 3 cups of tea out of this one. I've stopped doing that now, but I just realized I just went into a mode of we're soon going to lose everything. And the only point of reference I have is 2009, which was stark, and the Great Depression, which I was not a part of, but what I've gathered, it was also not good. So let's start doing that now. And I will say skills, we're still doing our own haircuts, which we're getting good at it. And I'm happy about that. And I will be excited to not, I do feel stressed every time we give haircuts. I have the razor and he's sitting in the chair and I just say I just want you to know I love you before we start this process.
I love that. I will confess that at the beginning of this shutdown, when all the toilet paper was gone, I might have shared a bit more about being from South Dakota and all the things that in the history of South Dakota have been used as toilet paper because they couldn't afford it back then. My favorite is my grandma's recommendation is back in the day, and still sometimes who buys a whole box of peaches? Very few people, right? But back in the day, you'd buy a full box of peaches, you'd put it somewhere dark, you'd save it for forever. But each peach comes individually wrapped with a tiny piece of paper that is very soft to keep the peach pristine. And it was
that's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
For the peach fuzz, that's good.
Hang up in the outhouse.
Here's our follow-up confession. So we did not do the run on toilet paper like everyone else did. I think we just shopped kind of before that phase happened. But for 2 years since we took a trip to Thailand, my husband's been bugging me about installing a toilet sprayer. And on the first weekend of quarantine, we installed the butt sprayer, toilet. And I was like, well, this is going to save all the toilet. And then I learned no, water gets everywhere. And so you need some toilet paper just to dab and soak up the water. Yes. So the sprayer is our other addition to the household. That was very much a coronavirus thing that will last well into the future.
I'm proud of you for that. It's like your own little baptism wand.
It is. Yeah. Oh yeah. We could do baptisms in our apartment. If I don't do baptisms,
Deacon.
I love that I don't have to do sacraments. I like them, but I don't have to do them. I can appreciate them from where I am.
Well, I want to encourage anyone who's watching live, if you want to pop up any questions, feel free to do so. Otherwise, we're two people happy to talk to each other, and we can also do that. One of the questions we've had from some of our previous Just Lutheran conversations is that people are trying to be the best they can with all the new terms and definitions, but for some folk, it's difficult, or they finally learned them all and they're different.
There's right? a new one.
Yeah, and since how often do we have someone who's professional job is to teach people how to get this right, or how to do the best they can, as my grandma would say. So what's your suggestion for folk who want to be advocates, want to show their family they love them, but all the words are hard?
Right. Yes. Okay. This is so funny because like GLAAD, we have like a media reference guide, right? Here's all the definitions, and every presentation I do, like, let's start with language and terminology. And then we also get the like, what is the right acronym? And it was like, first of all, there is no right acronym, but everyone thinks that like, I was like, no one agrees on this, or no one forced the acronym. And everyone thinks GLAAD is the one that does like force, like, this is what we will call ourselves. There's no way we will ever tell the LGBTQ community what to call themselves like that. And so I have to communicate that to them, be like, we are a big, diverse group, and you're going to see this different. And so, I'm like, here's what we use. This is why we use it. And there's some practical, pragmatic reasons. So GLAAD uses LGBTQ, which is what I've been using. And part of that, that may grow or change. The Q got added the last time we did a media reference guide. And we kind of like make sure that something is well understood enough in society to start to suggest that outsiders use it. Like, don't use language that you don't really understand. And we think that now this acronym is okay enough that you're going to get it, straight people. So one, it is confusing, and our language is ever evolving. And I think people have to understand that over time, as people have space to be themselves, they want more precise words to describe themselves. And so while there may have been a moment that homosexual or gay might have been the greatest catch-all for everyone who was different, people realize like there's ways in which I am unique and special, and they want language to do that. And so like that's where all these new words come from. And which means, yes, it is confusing, and yes, it does change. And every time you learn something, there's going to be a new thing. And it's not like we inside the community are immune to that too, because I identify as gay, and that's like the most basic of all the terms, right? It's the one that everyone hears. They know it can kind of be the catch-all word that was for a long time. And so one, be okay with that. Like you're not going to know. Two, especially with terminology that you might not have heard before, what I think the great thing is that there are really personal meanings and definitions. And I've said this about queer before. Queer means a bunch of different things to a bunch of different people, and you have to know what people mean when they say that. And the same would be true for other terms, non-binary, queer. I'm not thinking of other examples right now, but that's okay. And the best thing to do is to ask, what does that mean to you? Because instead of giving a dictionary definition, which sounds like we're going to get a pop quiz later, I would much rather have people know these terms through a relationship and through a person. And so when they hear the term in the future, they have a point of reference of like, oh, that sounds like Pastor Megan. And this is the way this person is like Megan, and this is the way this person is not like Megan, right? And then you get a better, more nuanced depth. You're like, oh, this is how these things are different. So I think it's okay to ask, and I think it's okay to ask like, what does it mean to you? And then really listen to the definition. And some of these terms, I just say, sometimes they have overlapping definitions. And people are going to choose one because of deeply personal reasons, and you'll hear that. So asking is great. A little research on your own is great. And I'll say, even for, we talk about this sometimes internally at GLAAD too, like non-binary is a pretty new term. And I've, started within the trans community, but sort of then like somehow leapt outside of that. And there's sort of and my coworker has great like diagrams of like, it's not like this is trans and this is non-binary. And it's not like this is trans and this is non-binary. It's a Venn diagram. And then he put a note of like, not drawn to scale. He's like, no one knows what the actual overlap is of like, there are non-binary, non-trans people, there are non-binary trans people. And then there is this like there's the overlap between the two. And so he's like, you just have to kind of get that. And it's a recent development. Like no one knew that word was going to be used in that particular way, and leap out of a community into way broader mainstream use. And which means, again, it's okay to ask people like, what does that mean? And then they can describe themselves. and they're probably going to give you a better, more nuanced understanding of who they are than what could ever get encompassed in a single word anyway. So that's long and complicated. People that just want to know the answer get frustrated at that, but it's the truth.
Well, it reminds me of like phrases like your podcast is yes, Jesus, right? Coming from yes, queen, which comes out of a queer community, comes out of a drag queen community. But now it's like something you can say at bachelorette parties to the bride, right?
Yeah.
Like sometimes things get named in pop culture and then become beloved and then become their own new thing taken on by other communities. And
I got asked that at training once too. I mean, was someone saying like, is it okay for us to use, and they said gay language like yes and other things. I was like, well, first of all, like roots wise, these came out of communities of color. Like the fact that like white gay guys like me are using, which I'll be honest, besides saying yes, Jesus, I don't usually say yes a whole lot, but like, yes, queen, or spill the tea, or like there's a lot of language terminology that really came from queer people of color spaces that overlapped enough with drag, ballroom, drag, RuPaul. It's funny, you can always find the inflection point. Like I think like my coworker, sort of like non-binary, so like Asia Kate Dillon was the like, oh, everyone hears this now. And I sort of feel like some of this language is a little bit like RuPaul took what was kind of like intra community, and by nature of having a TV show, like blasted that out to the rest of the world. And then people see and hear use that. And so you can kind of see this like insider language, and then like, oh, now it's being used at bachelorette parties, right? And I say not to use them, but like know the history and the etymology of where that language comes from and how it's used, and recognize that. And I think that's always really important.
Yeah, especially if it becomes commercialized and is making somebody money who isn't the community that originally created it. I like from the like nerdy Lutheran conversation standpoint, I also like knowing that it was something that Luther was up to, right? As he's translating the Bible, as he's creating a common German language that didn't exist before. And he's taking the notes of those who translated the Greek and the Hebrew, and he's making it into this biblical poetry. He makes a decision to change the language son of God to children of God. And that idea that those words, children of God, that we've used so much in our liturgies and our rituals and in caring for people and in some places in our being kind to children who come to worship, right? And to know that, as not woke as Luther was in a lot of ways, but there were some ways in which he was redefining and helping language be a little bit better. At least it gives us a place to like hang our hat on a tradition of trying to do the best we could by renaming things.
Yeah. And I think also recognizing, what's happening in the culture. I mean, the other piece, and like Luther, Paul, Jesus, this keeps happening, right? Like what are the cultural touch points that I can say and use as my examples that are ways in which I can share the gospel too? And I think yes, Jesus gets to do something like that. Like one, we talked some about current events, we're not breaking news at all. But I feel like it's a place where we can, we get to do irreverent conversations that people kind of do like, oh, I can't believe you did that. So like we did, and actually I love putting this together. I was like, we're going to do the penis episode because penises are big in the Bible. They're all over the place in the Bible. And you know what? They're euphemisms. We're just going to list all the euphemisms. We're going to talk about them. We're going to tell the stories. I like to remind people the first big fight that the Christian church ever had was about penises. We're just framing this whole thing in a completely different way so people can sort of get that. And then, I got to write a very fun prayer at the end of the episode too, that they got to recite. And I was like, I feel like these are conversations that we didn't get, that we have, and it's a way for people. I think people think that church community and language is always, that we're being so careful, or that it's quiet and reverent, or I don't want to say stuffy, because there's a lot of churches that aren't stuffy, even if they have bad theology. But like they take their relationship with God so fear-based carefully. I wanted us to approach that in a really different way. And having a comedian be able to do that, having someone who can, who is not afraid to say penis that many times, which we've just said many times on this live stream, and get to talk about it in a way that other people can be like, I didn't think people talk like this. I don't know if you're like this, but growing up, like I had a great pastor growing up, and it's one of those like, pastors aren't supposed to swear. He's like, the hell I'm not supposed to swear, and that he was the first person to do that. And clearly I have met many other swearing Lutherans. But it, in a way, it lets people realize how that our church can be accessible, and that it's not, so I'm not good enough to be in that space. We have to sort of show our realness and our humanity, and that actually helps our ministry even more.
Well, and those who are going to church in person or on live stream, because Easter is in 2 Sundays, watch out for the biggest penis-related ritual of all. The dipping of the new Christ candle into the baptismal font until the wax falls into the water. I'm not going to do that.
I have never been a part of a church that does that. Oh my goodness.
It's because to be reborn, through your baptism, in Aristotle, the Greek word for spirit, when you put it together with the Greek word for water, you get the Greek word for sperm. And so they literally believed that when you were
going to make the candle have sex with the baptismal font is what we're going to do.
Until the wax drips down into the water. Don't go to Episcopal worship because Lutheran worships are the best. But if you do go to an Episcopal worship service, watch for that part, and hopefully you're watching on a live stream so that if you giggle, I mean, all the older ladies who are there too are probably giggling too. But it's one of the most interesting parts of the Easter vigil as the new Christ candle is consecrated.
I learned something. The churches I've gone to have never had this be a part. Like I've never been an Easter vigil person either. I've always been like the sunrise service person, but I'm fascinated now.
I mean, that's probably why they did it. I mean, it was at the height of all of the fertility ritual.
Oh,
years, like it would be a great.
That is the Easteriest thing I've heard. Like that and bunnies. I mean,
although I don't know, each year I have delighted in the post of you and your husband wearing your Easter bonnets.
Yeah, I love this. That's a New York City tradition that I love. It's Halloween in springtime, and which means it's like a light and bright and colorful Halloween. It is so much fun. And I am not artistic. Like making the hats is like my husband's thing. And it's usually us and Michael's and me just like looking tired and overwhelmed. But I model those things incredibly well. And what's funny, we've done it long enough that my congregation knows this, that 2 years ago, I was scheduled to be the assisting minister. And they scheduled me for the 11 o'clock service. And the 9 o'clock service person reached out to me and said, do you want to swap? Because you usually do the early service and then go to the Easter parade. Like he was like, I will arrange the day so that you can do worship and the parade, because we show up in our stuff, take a bunch of photos at the church. People at the church want photos with us. This has now become like the Easter tradition of like, what do Ross and Richard show up dressed like this year? And then make our way over to Fifth Avenue and St. Patrick's Cathedral and just wander around and look at the other really cool hats, costumes, get your photos taken with all sorts of tourists and strangers. And after that, now I know why celebrities like sometimes get really rude and short, because people expect that they do a photo of yours, and like people like get into fights about whether they can like be exclusively in the photo. It was a thing, and learning how to manage that has been something else. But I love it. Easter in New York is amazing.
Well, and I think Easter is one of the queerest of all of the like church times. Like at the Hagia Sophia, it was all the trans leaders who were in their finest glittery robes who were leading the Easter service, right? There are some people who believe that the the man who's in the empty tomb in the white gleaming robes is wearing traditional garments of the eunuch. And so like, is that this kind of queer opening of what's going on for Jesus as Jesus's body transitions into something else that people can't recognize until they see him hold fish? Is there kind of this queer gatekeeper at the gate? And there's this great story from Ireland, the abbot of Drimminda, who falls asleep on Easter on a rock, changes from male to female, and then like goes marry this hunky dude, has like a bunch of kids, like 5 kids.
Okay.
Then a few Easters later, not the smartest abbot, falls asleep on that same rock again, turns back into a male, resolves things with his wife, who he previously was married to before he changed sex.
Okay. So had 2 families.
Then they all live together as friends and raise their kids together.
Oh, this is a way happier ending than I was expecting. I was like, oh, this is going to be like bad. Okay. I'm good with this now. For a while, I was like,
yeah, ancient Ireland. They were just, they just all lived together. And he still was like the priest who had like a 7-year hiatus.
Yeah. I feel like we could do that. Get a little commune. I'd be fine with that. Yeah. I feel like Easter. The queers love Halloween, and I get it, and I do too. But I feel like Easter, it's a similar, but just it's almost the opposite vibe. It's just odd to like walk around, and you're in broad daylight. It's like usually like the first nice weekend here, and I will say we do play it up for the media a little bit and kind of look to see what media hits we get. And my favorite thing, like, reporter asked them was like, what was the inspiration for your costume this year? And it was like feathers. We just said we wanted to use feathers, and now we did. Or the last time we went out was with, you saw this, we wore top hats and we put little mannequin heads on top of the top hats. So it was head, and they're like, what's your theme? I was like, heads on hats. Like there's no deeper thought about this whatsoever. Like other people, I get it. Other people like Stonewall or Resist or Fire Trump. Like we were getting a lot of those last few years. And then there's just us. They're like, oh, I just wanted to put a head on top of a hat and I thought it'd look cool. And we need to have long hair. And I found these ladies' heads that had multicolored hair, and a friend was a hairdresser. So we just did that. And she's up there. We give them names. And for that later that year, what I wanted to do, and I didn't get to do that for Halloween, I wanted to go out with that hat again, but I wanted to wear a sport coat, and I wanted to get like 100 Barbie doll heads, and I was going to staple the Barbie doll heads to the coat, kind of hanging by the hair, so it would kind of move when I walked as well. And it was like, it's just kind of heads everywhere. But you cannot just get heads by themselves. You have to buy the entire Barbie doll. And that, I was like, well, I feel like I'm going to throw away 85% of this doll just so I can use the part that had the long hair.
You gotta contact the families of all the kids who have broken the heads off of their dolls and hope they didn't mangle the hair already. That's really the
Yeah. Also realizing, like, again, being a gay man with just a bunch of severed women's heads on my suit, probably also like, it's a cool idea. And then you're like, and then I think through someone else's eyes, it was like, maybe that's not the best look. I still think it could be cool, but
I like the idea that the Lutheran Crusader, or whatever that LCMS magazine is that I've been into, is to have them just like pin down this conversation to like penis, severed women's heads.
I know. We started this conversation so like, let's talk about ministry, and we still are, but we're talking about fun ministry now.
But here's what I think. I think so much of what people learn about in the media is maybe more so for trans people right now than for the full gay community and the full queer community, is they see big headlines when something tragic has happened and when something terrible has happened. And there's like so few times that it's just like gay people happy. And that's like the headline. And so like, that's where I think the work that you're doing with helping people kind of create youth ministries that are about like even if the only thing happens in that ministry is that they are fed stories that their life and their future can be happy, at the same time that like headlines might be like death, murder, bad things, right? Like there's so few stories about people doing incredible ministry stuff. Like it took me until my 40s to like start doing research into ancient trans spiritual leaders. And if folk could have that when they're, you know, like I have a 7-year-old and an 8-year-old. One is a black trans child, and if she can grow up knowing that both black is beautiful and trans is beautiful, and that God names and claims her and every inch of her, no matter how it is now and how it will be in the future, then that's kind of like, it's like the dream of all that policy work that we did is to have people live without those struggles. And so I think that's where like how we lived through that is sometimes we wore silly hats that made no sense. And sometimes we did Bible study, and sometimes we like were really cold, so we had prayer shawls. And so I think that's the, like, for me, kind of the two ends of how this advocacy work really gets done is how did we nourish ourselves in the midst of what was terrible, and how do we make life less terrible for those who are coming next and those that we're nurturing.
Yeah. I feel like, especially in the advocacy world, and I feel this tension all the time of like, and I'll say like yesterday was fine until the evening. And then I just feel like the weight of like just a ton of bad news sort of hit me all at once, right? Like I can't even name all the states now that they are signing the trans sports bans. And that was just flooding through the healthcare law in Arkansas. That weirdly enough too, through the GLAAD Media Institute, I've trained a lot of folks. One of the people I've trained was Representative Park Cannon, the woman who was arrested for trying to watch the governor sign a major voter suppression law, and had that video go viral of her knocking on the door and then getting arrested. Another state representative that I also have worked with and trained in Denver, Colorado, was called a terrorist by a local sheriff at a gathering meeting that also got out there publicly. And so I'm like, okay, so on the same day, two queer Black women who are also both state representatives, who are both in states that just had massive gun shootings, like both have these attacks by law enforcement, kind of manifesting itself in different ways. But what that looks like, and then a little bit of reach out. So like that was weighing on me. So all that stuff is sort of happening. And I think there's always this like, you kind of sometimes think like, oh, it's always supposed to be a struggle, and it can't always be a struggle. And like, I was down yesterday, I was down a lot of today too. And then like, you have to realize like, okay, what's the way in which I find joy in the midst of knowing that I should be, I should be deflected and deflated. And joy in itself is faithful. It's resistance. It is, it's recognizing that God still made you unique, and you're going to be put in a broken, sinful world, which it is. It's broken and sinful in good times. It's broken and sinful when it's hard. And so find or make the places of joy for yourself and for your community. And that probably is what is going to end up manifesting some of these changes out into the longer world. Like not remembering the times I cried by myself in my bedroom, but also like the time that I walked down Fifth Avenue wearing a funny hat and felt like a rock star getting to do it. And I think that's what's also going to like change the world, not telling everyone what's wrong with it, but also making sure to remind them what's right with God's creation.
Yeah, I love that. The other thing that I think is that we haven't touched on yet is something I hear a lot in pastoral concerns with people. I speak with a lot of people who are gay and faithful, but are afraid that they will never be able to like find a husband who is also gay and faithful. As a person who's married and has been in a relationship for a long time, in a young amount of time, is that the right way to say it? But you guys have been together a long time.
We've been together a long time.
Do you have any like words for people who are nervous that they can't be faithful and gay and find like a husband?
Yeah, I think it's funny because, I mean, again, we've been together for a very long time. Way back then, I was not expecting nor looking for a relationship. And again, this is kind of like, this is the before time, right? Like, oh, I'm going to be doing church stuff and I'm gay. I should probably be single. And now I was kind of accepting that for myself, and then fell in love, right? And like that disrupts plans. So it was not in my plan. I think, people that, if you're spending all your energy trying to find someone else, that's not, like, make sure that you are living your own life and not for the life of someone that you haven't met yet. And I feel like in the course of you being and living out your authentic self is where you find and end up getting surrounded by other people that get attracted to that energy and that passion. And it means that you can, you might find your future spouse at church. Stranger things have happened. You can also find your future spouse on a dating app or a hookup app or at the club or whatever. And that's also fine. I think for queer Christian folks, don't feel like there has to be a moment like, when's the moment that I'm going to reveal this? It's not your deep, dark secret, right? And I think as you talk about yourself, when you first meet someone, talking about your faith as a part of your identity and who you are kind of sets that tone up front. And you'll either get someone you often get someone of like, oh, me too, or I used to be, or you'll get you might get someone who's repulsed. I don't think there's that many people that actually be repulsed if you like talked about your own personal faith. You might get folks that are curious or interested or want to hear more, and at least be really supportive. And if they're supportive of you and you build a life and a relationship together, then, they get to come along with you on that. And maybe it does mean that they start to join, but you might be the one that leads them, or they might figure out just how to be a supportive person. But like, I feel like the more we stress about it, the worse it gets. And so worry about being you, the person God made you to be, talk about your faith with folks, and then, put yourself in a space where other people are going to see your excitement, your energy.
Do you have any advice for sustaining that over long relationships?
Lots of check-in and communications, lots of assumptions about what you think is true about your relationship, because those things change over time. Mm-hmm. We call them playing old tapes in our relationship. And I think it's really interesting. We enjoy each other, and this year we've been together more than we've ever been before, right? Like normally couples go away to work and they're away from each other, and when we're in the same space at the same time all the time. And I think that was a good test for our relationship in terms of like, this is working. And it's a little, what do we do together and what do we have that's separate? And our jobs are very different from one another. So even when we're in the same room doing work, our work is different, and we have stuff that is uniquely Ross and stuff that is uniquely Richard. And then like, what's the stuff that's us together? I don't do weddings, but I have a lot of opinions about them, including I'm very anti-unity candle. And the whole idea, I lectured my sister at her wedding. This is before I got married, enough that she heard my rant. And when she talked to the officiant and they asked if she wanted a uni candle, her response was, "Oh no, Ross won't let me have one," basically. And then the pastor was like, "Yeah, there actually is no really good theological basis for one of those." It's like, exactly. There's no, it's an excuse to have your friend sing a song, basically. But the uni candle sort of thing has always been like, this is me, and then this is us. And what Richard jokes is what you do is you both light the candle together, then you really quickly blow out the other person's candle and keep yours lit. And so I think there always has to be a unique sense of this is me versus this is us. And how do we, and keep talking about what that is. Richard's not a churchy person. I mean, he does stuff with me, but he's very supportive. He hears what I do. He has an understanding of what I do. And and I have a sense of what he does. His skill set is not mine, so I kind of hear a lot of stories and I just listen along with it. But those are some of the things that help. And luck. I mean, long relationships are work and luck.
Yeah, no truer words have been spoken than that. And I think I particularly hope, like, there's some of us who have been kind of hunkered down for a really long time. Other parts of the world are less hunkered down. But I like to think that maybe as we head back into the world in a fuller way, whether that's going back into church spaces or going back into workspaces or going back, even to the grocery store, that we can do that in kind of like kinder ways that are more just to our neighbors. And I wonder if you have any advice for worship spaces that are hoping to kind of communicate that as they're coming back out from their sheltering, that they are supportive of LGBTQ folk. If there is, not that there's like a good catchphrase for it, but just ways that they can live it out as they're coming back. Because I think in these conversations we've kind of talked about, like with ADA activists, how can we be more open to people with fuller disabilities as we reopen our spaces, and with people of color, how can we be more welcoming? And so I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about ways as we reopen we can be much more welcoming to the LGBTQ amongst us.
Yeah, for this I have so I mean, there's the banners and the flags and all that, which is well and good. So I shouldn't roll my eyes that much at flags and banners, but
and you used to mail to people.
I've been, the rainbow flag is lovely. And the thing I've gotten to this with my presentations for GLAAD a lot too. I was sort of like, you recognize that like every one of these little like subgroups under the LGBTQ umbrella has their own color scheme and their own flag. And I sort of say things like, if you lean into that and someone who has that identity knows that color scheme and that flag, you will get like instant loyalty. Like either it's purely accidental that you put this flag up that's, blue and pink and purple, the bisexual flag, which maybe it was, that it could happen, but also like if it's not accidental, like, and you're intentionally putting it there, you've already sent a message that also means like, I don't just see you as generic LGBTQ person, I see you bisexual person. And I was like, and you can lean into that as far as you want with the wide array of sexual orientation and gender identity. So that would be one, is the rainbow flag is a lovely little catch-all, and you can always like take it deeper. And there are holidays, talk about this in the book actually, madeknownloved.org, that there are other holidays that exist outside of Pride, right? And I think the other thing for churches here is to show up in spaces where other things are happening. So Pride is easy. That's what most people do. There's LGBTQ History Month. We're in Transgender Awareness Week, Transgender Day of Visibility coming up at the end of this month, and bi week, and there's a whole spate of queer holidays from mid-September to December 1st, and the fall could be all like queer rotation all the time, and a lot of things happening outside of that. So one is that, and then two, I think, is having your church, your congregation, show up in spaces that are not your congregation as your congregation. And again, Pride's kind of an example of this, but I would also say this is the community meetings. It is the LGBTQ-owned businesses. It's developing the real relationship that lets people know that your church is showing up for us in our space, not expecting us to come to your space. And that's where the relationships, I think, can really be built and honed. And we're an actual invitation to maybe not worship for a first step, maybe something else. My church has Music Mondays. And so there's a great, like, if you want to come to a concert, it's on Monday, right? And other things that can sort of get people into the life of the congregation. And I know other people enter our congregation. We do a lot of food ministry stuff, which is kind of doubled in COVID. And that's also an entry point for people into the congregation, not just the recipients of the food, but also the people that like want to do something. It's a good volunteer opportunity. And now I'm doing it with this church, and now I'm in a relationship with these people in the church. I think that's the best, most authentic way to communicate the welcome. The problem with that is that it is not mass marketing. That is slow relationship building, one space at a time, kind of over and over again. But I also think it's going to be deeper and more meaningful. And it's less about people coming to you and more about where you're going to them.
I love that. So as you're able to leave your houses, put on your deacon stole or your deacon.
Why go to Union Square and like I actually get invited by other friends to do that and just stand there. Like people that know, and people that don't know sometimes come up and ask, "What you doing?" Oh, I just like put this on the forehead and I'll say a little prayer for you if you want that. Okay, no thanks. All right, bye. I think the public stuff and not obtrusive. I'm in New York. There's plenty of like people yelling into a bullhorn. I don't think that's effective. I've never been moved by a preacher that's yelling at me in the subway. That's just me. I don't think it's effective. But I also think what people look at is what we do.
Well, I adore you. I've adored you for years. I'm so excited that you were able to kind of share the breadth and the depth of some of your experiences. If people haven't been convinced yet, buy Ross's book.
Yeah.
And just a deep, heartfelt, sincere, like, thank you for all the ways that you have stood up for queer community, have stood up for the church, and have lived to see what so many others did not live to see. And not just still being here for it, but being a true kind of force of that change without the need for the credit, which is practically miraculous in days like these.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the platform that you've given me today, but I think you've been a really good friend and support. And it's been fun. We run in the same circles. We sort of like bump into each other and then kind of like circle back out and come back together. So I know this will be a continuation of a way longer relationship.
Yeah. Thank you again. Blessings for all you do. And we'll see you next time, everybody.